Good evening. We're going to go ahead and get started. This is my legislative assistant, Caleb Orr. He's going to just tell you about the procedure for questions tonight.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the town hall tonight. We're going to go with a pretty simple format here. We're going to open with some brief remarks from the members, and then we'll get into questions. If you would like to ask a question, please come around to the back and queue up on deck back here along the wall. And when it's time to ask your question, please come up to the dais and speak into the microphone and likely adjust it to the correct height. Thank you.
All right, well, we'll go ahead and get started. I'm Ron Latz, your state senator here, and this is our annual early session town hall in which we have an opportunity to share our thoughts as session starts to unfold. And probably more importantly, we have an opportunity to hear from you what your thoughts are, concerns are, what you'd like to see accomplished this legislative session. And then we will, at the end of session sometime, we will circle back and talk about what we've all done and get your feedback on that too. So we'll see if we've met our community's goals. Just briefly by way of background, I live in St. Louis Park, married, have 3 kids, one of whom is still in the house. The others are now out of college. I'm a lawyer in private practice, office here in St. Louis Park. My wife is also an attorney. I served on the city council here for 9 years. I served 2 terms in the House of Representatives, and now I'm in my 6th term in the state Senate. So I chair the Senate Judiciary and Public Safety Committee. I'm also on the Commerce Committee. And over the course of my service, I've been on the Higher Education Committee, on the K-12 Policy Committee, on the Civil Law Committee, and a few other committees along the way as well. I'm just going to give you a real brief synopsis of what I see coming down or ahead of us in the legislature. My colleagues will have a chance to introduce themselves and do the same from their perspectives. And then I think we'll open up the floor, and I'm sure we'll have an opportunity to cover most issues that are on people's minds as the questions or comments come forward. So I really appreciate you taking the time to be here, and glad to have such a great turnout, too. So this is a rather unique political environment this year. We have, instead of the last 2 years, in which the Democrats had the majority in the Senate, majority in the House, and the governor's office, now for the beginning of the Senate, we had a tie because we had a vacancy due to the death of Senator Dietzick out of Minneapolis. So until that seat was filled with a special election, we had a tie, and we engaged in a power sharing or shared responsibility agreement with the GOP and the Senate. We rotated co-presidents, co-party leaders, and had equal membership on our committees, and we had equally co-chairs that we alternated meeting to meeting. That lasted for a few weeks until the special election. It was won by a Democrat in Northeast Minneapolis, and now the Democrats are at 34 in the Senate, 33 Republicans, and we have returned to having majority control with the president, our majority leader, Senator Murphy, and the Democrats having the full-time chairs of all the committees. Most of the committees have gotten a little bit closer in numbers as part of an agreement with the GOP. So most of the committees have a 1-vote margin. The Judiciary Committee retains our 2-vote margin, but we added 2 members, 1 Democrat and 1 Republican. So we are now 7-5 on the Judiciary Committee. As you can imagine, given some of the philosophical range among the Democrats, and including on the Judiciary Committee, we have to have a pretty good consensus among the Democrats, or a complete consensus among the Democrats, and a pretty good consensus from some of the Republicans also, to be able to pass far-reaching and meaningful legislation. And I think the same is going to turn out to be on our floor action. I'll let the House members, when they have an opportunity, tell you a little bit more about what's been happening there and how that's going to work out. But we will, at the end, after we get through our legislative process, we will be meeting in conference committees and sorting out the differences between the House and the Senate, and the Republicans and the Democrats, and trying to come up with legislation that we can get a majority in each body and the governor would sign. Most important thing that we're doing this year, constitutionally mandated, is passing a budget for the next 2 years. The current biennium ends June 30th, which means if we don't have a budget in place, the authority to spend state money in most areas, except those that are mission critical, will expire, and there won't be any funds available or appropriated to spend. We've gone through that on occasion. It's not a pretty sight. I'm hoping that we don't get there this year and that we can find enough compromise. But we do have to pass a budget if we do nothing else this legislative session. Beyond that, everything is going to be gravy. We also have on our plates a capital investment bill that we didn't pass last year, and I know there's a lot of interest in this community, St. Louis Park, Hopkins, and the portion of Edina that we represent in passing a bonding bill. And there are a number of bills that'll be coming along, some of which will be some technical changes or adjustments based on experience from implementing the legislation that was passed in the last 2 years, and some other new ideas and thoughts that have arisen during the course of time, as we always do. The biggest part about the budget this year is that in the current first 2-year cycle, we have about a $600 million surplus of revenue over projected expenses. And that's not really enough to take care of inflationary increases, to maintain most of our current program levels. So that's going to be really, really tight anyway, let alone for proposals for new spending. The bigger difficulty is in the following 2-year cycle, which we call the tails, and which by practice and rule we have to balance as well when we pass this coming 2-year budget. So we've got to think 4 years out. And that's got about a $5 billion shortfall, which means if we want to get ahead of that, we're going to have to come in with more than just a balanced budget for the first 2 years. We're going to have to reduce the ongoing expenditures so that we don't have that massive shortfall in the following 2-year tail cycle. That's the big challenge. We can each talk about our own areas of budget expertise as you wish and as questions arise. So let's leave it at that. Maybe I'll turn to my next most senior colleague in the legislature, Cheryl Youakim.
Thank you. Tonight I do feel really senior. But no, hi, I'm Representative Cheryl Youakim. This is my 11th year in the legislature as a House member. I was staff before that. And my husband and I have been in Hopkins for 28 years. We have 3 grown kids that are all out of the house and adulting, hopefully. 1 that's married and 2 that are getting married again this year. So we're going to have a really busy year. Luckily, they're doing it after July. During the interim, I sub as a paraprofessional with kiddos with special needs in our districts. I tried the substitute teacher gig, but I don't have that natural art that's crafted over time to be a good teacher. So I love being a para. So what's happening at the legislature? First, I'll start out with, I started out 4 years in the minority and then 6 years in the majority. So having a possible tie coming up should be a new interesting adventure, but also the second time in state history and a really kind of great opportunity for us to dig in a little bit more together. It kind of reminds me of when my kids were little, and if they weren't getting along, I'd sit them next to each other on the stair, and we called it the peace stair, and they had to sit with each other until they talked it out. So might see that in the legislature. I've been on government operations, elections, property taxes, higher ed, transportation, ed policy. I've been the education policy, the 6 years we were in the majority, I've been the education policy chair, the property tax chair, and then the last 2 years, the education finance chair, which went with the opportunity to actually have a surplus to spend and do things we've been talking about for 20 years. I feel like it was a true honor to do that. We still have more work to do, though. This year, I serve on It's been a long day. This year I serve on taxes, Ways and Means, and then I am currently the minority lead on education finance, but we have an election coming up on March 11th in the Roseville seat. And if we do win that seat, we will be 67 in a tie, and then I will be co-chairing education finance with Chair Krisha. And Chair Krisha and he was the minority lead when I was the chair. We've known each other since I've been at the legislature. We get along well. We've had a lot of great conversations, and I am convinced and very hopeful that we will get a budget out the door. What we're waiting for, too, like Senator Latz said, is it's called the February forecast, but it's late this year due to things at the federal level. We'll be getting that March 6th. And that is kind of the continuation of the forecast we saw in November. So that's a little closer numbers that we picked to work with. While we, in the last few years, 2 years ago, we finally put back inflation on both sides of the budget. You guys probably, for those of you who have been around for a while, got tired of us saying like, well, in the forecast, there's inflation on the revenue side, but not on the expenditure side. So it looks like we have more money than we do to spend. Now it's on both sides. But the inflation on the expenditure side is kind of chunked out, and it still has to be appropriated by the legislature. So those discussions will happen. We just came from a meeting to find out really how things at the federal government in flux will affect our state, especially if funds get cut off. About 30% of Minnesota's funds come from the federal government. So we are also having those conversations in all of our committees to make sure we can see what's going on. Once we get the targets, our leadership, once we get the forecast, our leadership set targets for each of the committees. And that's another opportunity this year to look different, because Speaker Damath and Speaker Emeritus Hortman will be working together to figure out the House target. And we're kind of hoping it's like joint targets across the board so that we can really get this done, because we have our first break April 20th, and I think that might be when we have to have all the bills at least toward the floor. So stay tuned, and I look forward to your questions.
All right, good evening. So I'll just add a few other comments. My name is Larry Kraft. I'm now in my second term here in the House. My background is I spent 25 years in the tech industry, actually moved to Minnesota 22 years ago. Yeah. When I was recruited to run sales and marketing here. My wife and I thought we were going to be here for 3 to 5 years, but we're here. We've had kids here. My eldest is a sophomore in college, and my youngest is just turned 18 and will graduate from high school this year from Park. So we love it here. About 11 years ago, I made a career shift to focus my time on doing something about climate change, ran a nonprofit for 5 years that helped students take local action on climate. And one of the great things that came out of that was students in St. Louis Park initiating our climate action plan here. I then got involved with local politics to implement the plan they came up with, and have kind of why I've gone on to the state level. I get involved in many things, as you'll hear about, but that's kind of my story of what led me into this job. Committees I serve on, I'm on the Energy Committee. I will be the vice chair when we get back to a tie. I'm on Transportation, and I'm also on State Government. Just a comment about session right now. As you know, it was a rocky beginning for us in the House. And where we're at right now is we're at a temporary one seat. The Republicans have a temporary one seat advantage on the floor and in committees, which means that they can bring whatever bill they want to committee and pass it through committees and bring it to the floor. They cannot pass anything without some Democratic support, because it takes 68 votes to pass legislation. So you can move things around in committees, but to get anything done requires us to work together. I tell you right now, what it feels like is many of the bills we're seeing have no chance of really getting Democratic support. Now, they have every right to be doing this, but there's a lot of messaging and posturing going on, I think, at this point. What we have to get to, and I think one of the really things I'm disappointed about as to what's happened over the past few weeks, is that we have to work together. We have to work together to get out a budget, to pass anything. And so my concern is that this time up front, where they're able to do things without working with us to push things through, is is not letting us build those muscles of how we're going to need to work together to get out a budget. So we'll see where we get to, but that's the phase we're in. So you're probably seeing more, you'll see more contentious bills in the House, maybe than you do in the Senate. You'll see more debates on things like that, on things that probably don't have a chance of passing, and then we're going to gradually shift over because we do feel pretty confident we'll win that special election. It's in a heavily Democratic district, and get over to a different type of time in session. And the budget, we're going to get the forecast, we're going to get the budget done, and then we're going to wait and see what happens at the federal level. Some of these executive orders and other things that are being contemplated could really blast, even after we're done, could blast a huge hole in our budget that we may have to deal with later in the year. So it's going to be a wild ride. My areas of focus this session, I'm focused a lot on housing, on making sure we have enough housing in the state, on given my energy focus on the grid and grid optimization and weatherization of homes. How do we create a good startup environment for energy startups in Minnesota? One thing I'm looking at, mental health stuff, bonding for St. Louis Park, and then a bill that I'm working on with Senator Latz and Representative Youakim will get involved with this as well around DWI policy, which you'll hear, given what happened at Park Tavern several months ago, we've been really digging into this. And so you'll see something, public from that, on that from us in the next couple of weeks. So with that, I think we can open it up to folks that have questions. And as a reminder, if you do, go on over there. If people are watching online and have a question, feel free to email it to my email account. And then Caleb here can pick it up. And my email account is rep.larry.kraft@house.mn.gov. All right, so questions, please line up. And go ahead.
Good evening.
Oh, and if you could also mention what community you're from when you, and you can say your full name or just part of your name, but just what community you're from when you ask.
Chris Clark, I live in St. Louis Park.
Thank you.
Yeah. How do you want us to address you? Senator, House Representatives, first names? Do you care?
You can call me anything you want. I don't care. I know what happens
Well, be
behind
careful.
my back plenty.
Ask
so
Larry, be careful. I don't want to go overboard. So my question, I have a bunch of them, but I'll defer. House File 7. Here's some of the things that were contained within House File 7. Registration of convicted sex offenders. Accountability for negligent prosecutors. Penalties for when peace officers are assaulted. Penalties for reckless fleeing from police. Penalties for sex trafficking, trafficking of stolen vehicles. Penalties for eco-terrorism. Penalties for blocking freeways and transit. And accountability for bailing out criminals who then continue on to commit additional crimes when they are on bail or out on bail. And every Democrat that sat on that committee voted against it. I have another example of a criminal who was supposed to be in prison because he was caught with a gun. It was supposed to be a mandatory 3 years, but our DOC head let him out after 1 year, and then he killed somebody. Crime is a big problem. And I lived in Minneapolis for 24 years. I know that of which I speak, and that Senator Latz is on the Judiciary Committee is an opportunity to say, why do we have people not being held accountable in this city and in this state? That is a huge problem. Where I live, I'm just south of 394 and right at 100. I hear the gunshots that still echo in Minneapolis. I lived there for 24 years. I heard them every night there. They're now coming into our city. And yet people who get arrested with a gun get bailed out, get released out of prison, And here we are killing somebody. And that's a problem, and Democrats don't seem to really have an answer for why you would not support additional criminal penalties to hold these criminals accountable. And that's a problem for a lot of people who have to deal with the carjackings and the assaults and the muggings and the robberies, and nobody seems to want to hold them accountable. And I'd like to hear your thoughts on why that is and how we can be better to make sure that these people and everybody who lives in your districts are as safe as we possibly can be. The police department do a great job, but it's after that that we really fail. And it's our judiciary that doesn't do a very good job. Thank you.
It's a House file, Larry. Go for it.
It's one of the ones that actually have to sit in the
You weren't aware of that, but yeah.
Well, all right, I can jump in
I hope
at
they
any
fill
time
you
if
in,
you want.
Ron.
Yeah, okay, I'll take it.
Something similar and
Sure. Thank you for the question. Boy, I've got a lot of responses to that, so I'm going to try to be succinct on this. Larry just showed me the House file language, and there is a companion Senate bill that Senator Limmer has introduced in the Senate. I'm not really closely knowledgeable of the details in there. But it looks like it's got a lot of penalty increases, not necessarily new penalties. So it's got some registration requirements and so on. I can't get into the details on that because I haven't read the bill that closely. It hasn't been heard in the Senate, and I can tell you it's probably not going to be heard in the Senate. And I'll tell you one reason why, just based on what I know of it. It's a mistake to think, number one, that there are not already penalties for most or all of the categories that you identified in your remarks. For assaulting police officers, for carjacking, for doing all of the other things that you noted. There are already penalties, substantial penalties in many cases, felony penalties for the crimes that you identified. So that's number one. Number two, it's a mistake to conclude that increasing penalties will necessarily deter crime from occurring. At some level, it does. Sure, if you made every speeding ticket a felony, people probably wouldn't go, 5 or 10 miles an hour over the speed limit even. But that's not going to happen. Or we'd have to quadruple your taxes to pay for new jail space and prison space. Nor would it seem fair. So the criminal justice system is designed for a number of reasons. One, of course, is to hold accountable those that commit crimes. Another one is to basically get vengeance, retribution on behalf of the community against those who have committed crimes. These are the philosophical underpinnings of the criminal justice system. And the third is to deter crime from occurring. And we have deterrence is a lot harder to show just from increasing a penalty from a 3-year to a 5-year felony, for example, because so many factors go into what an actual sentence will be. How long someone will actually be sentenced to prison if they go to prison instead of a workhouse. Even if they don't go to prison, a lot of them spend 6 months or a full year in a workhouse run by the counties. So in my experience, it's a lot of saber rattling, and it's really good talking points to say we should increase penalties on this, that, and the other crime. But in terms of having an actual impact, it's much lower, except, of course, that individual is locked up perhaps for a little longer period of time, and then they're not out there committing crimes. So that is an important element, and I have supported increased penalties under some circumstances. I've introduced and passed bills of my own to do that. But it's a more complex picture than was simply described. With regard to gun crimes in particular, there are a lot of gun crimes already on the books, one of which you might be referring to, that if you're a convicted felon, it's unlawful for you to possess a firearm. And if you commit other crimes, or if you are caught possessing a firearm while ineligible, then you can get charged with it. if you are convicted of that count, there are mandatory sentences, but there are really two different kinds of mandatory sentences. And this gets a little bit esoteric here, but there are mandatory sentences and there are mandatory mandatories. Mandatory mandatories meaning there's no way around that sentence. A judge has to follow the law and execute that sentence. But many other mandatory sentences have off-ramps to account for individualized circumstances. So it's going to take up a lot of time to go into too much detail over that, but suffice it to say that there are reasons why cases get resolved without convictions for counts 1 or count 2 or count 3. Sometimes the more serious crime is the one that gets a conviction, and a less serious crime of felon in possession of a firearm doesn't result in a conviction, in which case there's no executed sentence for that. Sometimes the circumstances are such. All right, so I'm told that the audio was working, but the video was not, which is just fine with me. So I don't have to repeat anything, but I'll wrap up also because I want my colleagues to have a chance to respond. But I want to address the bail question real quick. Your complaint is that people bail out, but bail is guaranteed in the Constitution. Every person who is arrested and charged with a crime is guaranteed the right to post a bail-only option to get out of jail pending the resolution of the criminal charges. So there are some issues in the bail system with regard to cash bail and with regard to bonds and stuff like that. But people are going to bond out if they've got the resources, or if there are organizations that are willing, or family or friends, to post the cash bail for them to get out. With regard to the DOC release, I'd have to know the specifics of a particular case to be able to tell you. The commissioner has made a lot of judgment calls, sometimes for releasing people that have done what's right, and they're shown promise. And there were some releases during COVID as well, just to save lives. So that we'd have to look at that a little bit more closely. That's fine. But I'm not going to get into second guessing the commissioner in any particular decision, because you may have a name, but no one but the commissioner has the file of the people of the individual that was reviewed. So by the way, did we actually pass there was a proposal to spread that decision out to an outside advisory board rather than having the commissioner take full responsibility for those decisions. So there'd be more input on that and would insulate it a little bit from the politics, which I supported. That was, I think, would have been a good move. So the only other thing I'm going to say is that when you talk about gun violence, I was proud to be the chief author of the Red Flag Bill, the Extreme Risk Protection Order Bill that we passed 2 years ago, as well as the expanded background check bill for people who want to have permits to carry firearms or permits to purchase firearms, to make sure that we aren't arming people that have criminal convictions that would make them ineligible to possess firearms. The only way to know is to put a purchaser through a background check. The Red Flag Bill, we now have 1 full year's experience with that. It's been carefully used. I think there have been 113 petitions or something like that around the state in 2024. 94% of the petitions were granted. Most of those petitions were brought by law enforcement. About 13 or 15 of them were brought by family members. Some of the orders that separated people that were going through emotional crises from their firearms, and that their family or law enforcement thought were dangerous to themselves or to others. Most of them were short-term orders. Some of them lasted up to the full maximum of 1 year. I'm absolutely certain that there are probably 100 people alive today that would have been dead if we hadn't passed that law. It prevented suicides, which is the #1 cause of deaths in greater Minnesota. It prevented murders of domestic partners or families or friends or others. In a couple of those cases, The people who were the subject of those orders had made comments on social media or had notes that their families, that law enforcement became aware of, that they were contemplating mass shootings. So gun violence is an incredibly complex situation. So while I respect your views and concerns about it, and I share the concerns about them, I think we need a complex solutions to that as well. So I'm going to leave it at that right now, and we can circle back if other people want to continue the conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, just a few comments. Public safety is a foundational issue for government, and it's something that we need to be focused on. It's absolutely critical. And to really address it, I think you need to take a comprehensive view. So yes, appropriate penalties, but also addressing root cause. So to address this, we have to address root cause issues like poverty, like homelessness, like access to guns of people that shouldn't have access to them. So, in Minnesota, overall crime rate is at a 60-year low. Okay, that doesn't mean that everything's good. Violent crime has gone down the past few years, but is still higher than we want it to be. But we need to address this in a comprehensive fashion.
And what I'd add too is, I'll get to the comprehensive fashion, but we also did a lot of investments that we've been talking, like I've been talking to our police chiefs, I've met with all of them, did as sheriff right along, that we invested about $300 million last year straight to local police departments. And then we also invested in a grant, so they're really just like teachers, they're hard to find. So we're trying to get more people into the workforce for both police and peace officers and our teachers. So we had a grant out there to help police departments recruit mid-career folks that are like, I've always wanted to be a police officer, but I went this route and I changed my mind. So it's a way for them to get on-the-job training while going through the coursework and get hired without. It's still very rigorous and still has a lot of the background checks, but it's a way to get into the police department. It's kind of like an on-the-job training thing as well. And my police chiefs have all asked. I represent Edina, St. Louis Park, and Olive Hopkins, quarter of Edina, 2 precincts in St. Louis Park with Larry, and then Olive Hopkins. And they all want to see this program continue because they need more folks. And then also the discussion, we started program where you could tag vehicles so that you could avoid police chases, and now they're asking for some adjustments to that too. But from my end especially, I don't sit on public safety, and I used to be able to get through all the bills, but they've already introduced 1,615, so it's hard to get to all of them. But sitting on Ways and Means, if it has any money attached, I get to see it before it goes to the floor, which is very nice to review them. But from the education standpoint, it's really about investment in our kids. I mean, we saw the spike in carjacking, and mostly of youth, starting in COVID. Now it's gotten better, but it's how do we make sure those kids know that there's something better out there? As the adults in the room, what have we missed out on? And especially around absenteeism. If a student misses 2 days a month, they're less likely to graduate by like 15%. Let alone 4 days a month, which is where chronic absenteeism is. And we invested a lot of money in that this last, in 2024, to try to get to the root of that and having our school districts work together and trying to figure out, because also kids can't learn unless they're in school. So we want to make sure that our young people get on a good start so that they don't end up in jail. In fact, the number one indicator of a student going to jail in the future is not being able to read by 3rd grade. They're actually, actuaries figure out how many prison beds you're going to need in 10 years just by 3rd grade reading scores or 5th grade reading scores. So we spent a lot of money in 2023 and 24 launching the READ Act to get more investment into teaching our kids how to read, to make sure that we don't have the outcomes like that. You either pay it in the front end or you pay a lot more in the back end.
While we're on the topic of public safety, I'm just going to add one addendum because there was a press conference yesterday on the issue of crime. And Larry's right. Crime is down in Minnesota. Meaningful reductions in property and violent crime. But over the last 2 years, we've invested $460 million in combined investments in public safety, youth programs, and victim services. And by the way, it's going to get tougher on victim services with the federal funding cuts going on right now. We put a lot of money into state funds for victim services because the Victim of Crimes Act and the Victim Against Women's Act were not funded adequately by the feds. Those funds were cut. So we can get into victim services at some point if we wish. But 300 million of that 460 were public safety grants to communities across the state to use to recruit, retain police officers, to improve training for firefighters and other public safety needs and EMTs. So we've made the investments in that. And there's a lot more to talk about there, so I'm happy if public safety comes up again, we can talk further, but I'll leave it at that. We have another person who wants to ask a question, maybe on a different topic.
I've been in Minnesota for a grand total of 4 years, coming from Connecticut, another blue state, and I was born in Illinois, another blue state. So, but I wonder, is there a juvenile diversion program now in effect in Minnesota?
The answer is yes, but it's pretty much county by county.
Okay.
How they do it. Even individual communities, police departments and city attorneys develop some of their own juvenile diversion programs. They may not even arrest a juvenile. They may immediately take that person or put them into a program pre-charge, not even turn it over to the city attorney for consideration of charges. Sometimes when the charges are brought, there's another program in which the city attorney has set up within their community to have juveniles go into a different pathway, find out what the issues are, give them the support that they need. We're really fortunate in St. Louis Park. We've had the Children First program for many, many years, and it's built on identifying the strengths of the youth, not on their weaknesses, and strengthening their strengths so that they can do a better job. And then the weaknesses get filled in and taken care of as the kids get stronger in their strengths as well. And that's been replicated in other places around the state, actually around the country. But we also put a lot of money. This used to be within the Judiciary Committee's jurisdiction. It's now moved over to the new Children and Family Department. But youth intervention programs that identify youth at a young age who are showing signs of some issues, difficulties, and getting them the services so that they don't get in trouble with the law in the first place. And then once cases get into the county attorney's office, Ramsey County, I know, Hennepin County, they've got very specific processes for screening out cases in which some should go the criminal route or through the juvenile court system route, which technically they're not, they're delinquency petitions, and some go into an alternative path, so they don't even have to deal with the criminal charges.
I forgot to mention my name. It's Westerly A. Donohue, D-O-N-O-H-U-E, and it's Wes for short. Now, I've gotten involved a little bit in Larry Kraft's area, energy, and I'm starting to join the little committees and things. But there's one issue that really irks me, which is that the Republicans in the Minnesota legislature were able to not promote the summer cooling grant of, am I pronouncing it correctly? No, wait a minute.
LIHEAP.
LIHEAP, yeah. Could you just elaborate?
Yeah. So LIHEAP is the low-income heating. I can't remember all the terms, but it's a program. A lot of funds come from the federal government for that, but it's to make sure that in Minnesota, folks in the winter that have trouble paying their bills can get help, right? So they don't have things. There's some rules in Minnesota that utilities can't turn off service in the winter, And what we've wanted to do is to increase the funding for that program to be able to extend it so that it also applies to the summer months. Because as our climate changes and things get warm in the summer, more and more we're finding heat stress is really dangerous. So wanting to extend that to the summer to be able to provide some assistance on the cooling side of things. The challenge with that is it's a substantial amount of money to be able to do that. We're talking, tens of millions of dollars that we would really need to be able to do that over several years. I'm actually carrying that bill again. I carried that bill in 2023. I have that bill this year. It had a hearing in the Senate. Senator Dibble is carrying it in the Senate. I've asked for a hearing for it in the House. I haven't gotten one yet. I expect I will after we get back to 50-50. That said, I have to, temper expectations given the budget situation. Investments like that are going to be challenging, although it's very worthy, and it's something that I think we really should be looking at.
People will die in the summer because of this heat that's been so marked in the last 3-4 years. It's astonishing how much warmer the climate is now.
Yeah, absolutely. And this, I will also kind of revert back to a comment I made before, that there's, one of the issues here, the core issues here is effectively dealing with poverty. And when we're at the federal level right now, making all kinds of cuts to programs to be able to give tax cuts to wealthy people and not addressing the wealth gap and the issues in this country, it's going to make the situation harder and worse. So absolutely, we need to do something. We need to. It's a worthy cause, and I hope we can invest some money in that.
And I was just going to add, in the meantime, we've had our cities stepping up as well. I know Edina and St. Louis Park have wonderful park buildings. Sometimes they're open in the summer months and they're air conditioned. Hopkins doesn't. We're 2 by 2 miles. We're 65% rental. A lot of the rental is naturally occurring affordable housing and much older. We're starting to get some of the newer ones, and we're bisected by 169.7 and Excelsior. So a lot of our community space is along Main Street. And the city brought a bonding bill forward last year. We had it in the bill, but then things didn't quite get passed. But it provides community hubs in 2 areas of our city where it's the highest density of multi-unit housing that will be open to the public with an attendant there most of the day, summer and winter. People can use it to rent out. We can have polling locations there. We could have early childhood and family education classes there. It'll be about room for about 75 people to 100. But they would also be used as cooling stations or heating stations if your heat went out in the winter. So sometimes the cities have to step up, but we're trying to get a bonding bill. And when we do the bonding, you have to have 50% has to come from the city, and then 50% from the state. So we're hoping to pass that this year for Hopkins.
Do you anticipate that seniors may have a hard time with that because of limited mobility issues?
Yes, and we do have an aging population in Hopkins as well. But we have a very young one and a very socially, economically challenged one. 30% of our households make under $35,000 a year.
35%. Okay. Yeah, my last question is, I don't want to get into any of the legal issues that the senator has brought up because I understand how complex they are. Energy seems a little more straightforward, comparatively speaking. It should be. What can we do as citizens to support the efforts of the DFL in expanding LIHEAP?
Yeah, so what you're doing right now, raising it up, sending notes to me, to look to other folks that are on the Energy Committee, both in the House and the Senate, and if you know them or reach out to them, or if you know people in their district, reach out to them to let folks know it's important. Watch for when there's a hearing, come and attend, maybe even testify if you have a story to share. Those are all things that you can do to raise the visibility on it. So it's let us know and organize.
Thank you all.
Getting nervous. Sometimes we have a line here and it's been pretty quiet. I do want to just add one caution. This is a nonpartisan town hall. So we want everyone to feel comfortable making your comments without getting into any real partisan activity. So we work in a partisan environment. We have to understand it. I just want to make sure that we are as respectful as we can for divergent views as they are presented here. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Jackie Holmbeck. I live in St. Louis Park. My issue is long-term care, assisted living, and nursing homes. I have a family member who's been in an assisted living facility in Minneapolis. I cut this article out. I've been doing a bunch of work trying to address the lack of care that I see. I know this has been an issue. This article talks about the statewide package of, I believe, $300 million that was passed a couple years ago. And I'm all for giving money for our elders to be properly taken care of. My problem is that it seems like some of these places are run by hedge funds, you know. So I do not, at the place my family member is, I do not see them spending the money that they've been given. So I won't go into too great detail, but I have called the ombudsman office. I've had an ombudsman there. The problem I see is they have too much to do, so the actual follow-up doesn't necessarily happen. My sister has been in this facility for 15 months, and they are not providing her basic care. So food, she's a vegetarian. I have been fighting constantly to make them give her food that she can eat. I bring her groceries and I make things from my own kitchen, so she has some food that is semi-nutritious. She's got dementia, so they do not provide stimulation. It's basically a prison where she is. The name of this facility is Miller's Landing. So just keep that in mind as you do your work in the legislature. I'm sure that's not the only place that isn't providing help for these people. They're supposed to clean her studio apartment once a week. Months go by where they have not cleaned. Okay, so it's the food, the lack of stimulation, the cleaning. There are more. I'm not remembering everything. So what
let me make a suggestion, if I might.
Okay.
Because you've got obviously a very personal situation that needs some attention. And it's hard for us as state policymakers to get involved in individual cases like that, intervening on behalf of that. However, there are some government agencies who have responsibility for following up on that. And if you want to leave some contact information with Caleb or my staff, Zach Cullen is in the back as well. We can try to put you in touch with the right agencies and see if some people whose job it is to get involved in these kind of things and try to help you will be able to do that, we hope.
Yeah.
Fair enough?
I appreciate that. And that's one of the reasons I'm here, is to connect with my representatives. I have actually done some of that connecting with these agencies who are supposed to help. It doesn't necessarily go the way that would be helpful. So I filed a MARC report on this facility, but I got a call
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I think what I want to do, before we go too far further
Okay.
down the road on your individual
I
situation,
promise I will.
let's just make sure your contact information is
Yeah.
left. And one of our offices can follow up and help put you in the right place. Sometimes it just needs a call or a note from one of our offices to make sure some extra eyes get on an
Okay,
issue.
that'd be
You could give
great.
you could give it to Caleb, and then the other thing, this appears to be in Minneapolis, so the other thing we can just connect with the representative from Minneapolis, and maybe they've heard of other things going on with this.
I don't even know who that would be.
We'll figure it out.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
All right.
But I just,
Thank you.
I want you to know that there needs to be accountability for these places. And if you are giving them money, they should be spending it on the people, not adding to their profit.
Yes.
Well, that raises some bigger public policy questions.
Well, and we had, there has been 6 years. We started on the path where assisted living wasn't licensed and didn't have the same oversight as nursing homes. And now the final phase of that is rolling in, so hopefully things will help. And then on the positive note, just we are trying to get workforce development back into our K through 12 classrooms, our high school classrooms, and both Hopkins and St. Louis Park have an amazing certified nursing assistant program, and these are usually the people working in these homes where they can do the practicum and hands-on experience, and it basically looks like a hospital room, and then also all the book work, so by the time they leave high school and turn 18, they can take the test and become a certified nursing assistant right away, and maybe they stay there, maybe they use that money they're making to start going to nursing school or become a doctor, so hopefully we're always looking at, especially in our 10th through 12th grade, looking at those ways to create those pathways for our students for when they leave high school, because sometimes a four-year college might not be what they want to do. So we have to give them as many opportunities as we can. And the CNA programs are popping up all over. Hopefully the workforce issue will change.
No, I acknowledge that that is a problem globally, but in this situation and in many situations, it's not the workers that is the problem. It's the facility who is basically stealing money and
Thank
not
you.
taking care of our elders.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Susie Kaufman. I live in St. Louis Park, and I'm also the state chapter leader for Moms Demand Action. That's a gun violence prevention organization. And so I don't know if you know, because you said over 1,000 bills have been brought up in the House, but today the House Public Safety passed a bill, to a stand your ground or shoot first bill. And I understand that that's may or may not go anywhere in the House and hopefully won't go anywhere in the Senate, but that's a big concern. I think many people don't know that the people in the House are creating offensive bills about like to give more people power with their weapons. And so I wanted everyone here to know that, and also hear if there are going to be any bills introduced like secure storage or lost and stolen gun, mandatory reporting. I understand there was a kind of detente, but it seems like introducing a shoot first bill and then passing it out of committee sort of ends a detente on gun violence bills.
Well, I'll start. So this is because we are in this situation where this was initiated by a Republican and was passed out of committee, I imagine on a party line vote, and where I would be surprised if it's able to pass on the floor. Last session, there were, I don't know the status this session, but there were secure storage. I actually was quite involved with that, as there's someone from St. Louis Park that testified about his personal situation. And so I would anticipate that coming again. I don't know about a detente on this stuff. We were trying to get things done last session. But yeah, that is one of the results of the current situation that we're in. But I would be surprised if that passes on the floor in the House.
I just want to thank you for being here. I saw all the red shirts today in the Capitol, and it meant a lot. I know it meant a lot to our committee members there. And Representative Kraft is right. We're at where we're at. I can imagine it, yes, going to the floor, but it won't get 68 votes. And I just want to thank you for the work you're doing.
Thank you. And I mean, really, so much thanks to Senator Latz for being a champion of gun violence prevention in our state. I mean, he did get those bills passed. And if we're concerned about public safety, background checks and ERPOs are significant measures towards creating a safer Minnesota. So I appreciate all of you and your support for gun violence prevention. Thank you. And everybody should know what is being introduced. If they're introducing 1,000 bills, that's a lot of stuff to follow, but they do matter. So thank you all.
Thank you, Susie. And I can pretty much assure you the Stand Your Ground bill is not going to get a hearing in the Senate Judiciary Committee.
Can I ask why?
Well,
Take the time to hear the bill?
Oh, I know what the bill says. For one, I can assure you that there would not be enough votes to pass it out of committee. And so we don't have the time to hear bills that we know aren't going to go anywhere. I can also tell you there have been a lot of innocent people been killed around the country in states that have Stand Your Ground. Some have been in the media recently as well. But it's a pretty complicated bill in terms of the way it plays out. But when you've got someone who is authorized to shoot through the door without knowing who's on the other side, and they can just do it without facing any consequences whatsoever, that's what Stand Your Ground bill does. And you can shake your head no, but that's what it does. Look at Florida. Look at the people who have died in Florida where they've got the Stand Your Ground bill and they aren't holding anyone accountable for the shooting because the law allows them to do that.
And you don't have to just look at another state. You can read the language. It lowers the threshold for what it takes away the reasonable person threshold of feeling that you're going to be attacked. It adds it to basically if you think someone's going to punch you in the face and break your nose, you can shoot them. It adds the word, this is a fun word I learned when I was following this bill, curtilage. It means that anybody's on a public sidewalk in front of your house and you feel threatened. It moves your castle where you are, anywhere you go, in a state park, on a bench, in your car. So words matter and the details matter. And a lot of folks would be willing to talk about this, but this hard line in the sand people make when it comes to this side or that side is how we don't get things done. So just a mother speaking.
I also will just need to add on the data on Stand Your Ground. Folks that have analyzed it show that there's a 6 to 11% increase in homicide rates in states that have it.
My name is, can you hear this? Mike Stolte. In June, I will have lived in the same house in St. Louis Park for 55 years. And I have enjoyed every year I've lived here. I look at this group of people here, caring about the community, and our representatives here who make themselves available for the kind of session we have here. It's I appreciate very much living here and having the kind of community and service that we have. I would say that of the people that I've seen represent us over these decades, you people are the current group of a long line of people who have served this community very well. And we all benefit. Now that being said, I will take a moment to acknowledge and publicly thank you, Senator Latz, for your work with the Brain Injury Alliance of Minnesota on behalf of disabled people who have survived brain injury. I expect the latest provisions in the bill you drafted last year to attract broad public support and bipartisan approval at the Capitol. I'm hopeful for that. And the latest that I saw have compelling provisions in them. Time doesn't allow me to go into details about my own family other than to say that I have a special interest in brain injury problems because my son, at the height of his career with FEMA, suffered a brain injury when the wheels came off a semi on the highway and he couldn't avoid crashing into them. He's had limited capabilities ever since, and that's why I'm kind of pushing for some additional recognition of the plight of brain injured people, and it's properly called the invisible injury. You can tell when somebody has a broken leg or has crutches and so on, but a brain injury, you could have somebody with one of those right on your block and not know about it because usually they're indoors and they're not out in the public, very, very far, very much exposed. So addressing the invisible injury problem, I think, is to the credit of the state right now, and with Senator Latz's sponsorship of some of those improvements in the treatment of those folks, I think we can make a lot of headway. Time doesn't allow for me to go into details about my family situation or whatever, or my son's circumstances, but I will call your attention. Some of you might have gotten this in the mail. Brain Injury Alliance issues a periodical called Mind Matters. And if you have an interest, I have brought copies along from the December issue. That's has 2 stories in it about the invisible injury, I refer to it as. I happen to have one part of the 2 stories, and I don't care to have the recognition. I don't want any recognition for it, but I want you to have the opportunity to read about the fallout from this kind of an injury. And now that I've said that, I have extra copies. I'll go park myself at the back of the room. If on your way out you care to have a copy, you're more than welcome to it. You might have somebody that lives on your block that has a family member or a relative with a brain injury, and they might like to see what others have said about that. Now, just one question for Senator Latz, and then I'll sit down. Do you have any thoughts on what's possible in this legislative session for dealing with this subject, especially since it is taking form in the extension of your bill and possibly others? But is this shortened session going to make it extra difficult to get that bill passed?
Well, Mike, first of all, thank you for your kind words, and know how many years you've been working on this issue on behalf of your son and others who also have TBI. I think every bill is going to have a reduced chance of passing with the shortened session. Not short in terms of when we formally started, but in terms of when we've all been able to get together and start moving stuff forward. And every bill that has any fiscal note attached to it is going to be more difficult to pass as well, just because we're going to have these funding difficulties. But that doesn't mean we're not going to get stuff done. It just means that we're going to have to find the resources if we can, or find ways to do things that don't involve fiscal appropriations. And we're going to have to find a way to make it bipartisan. So I'll be working hard to try to accomplish that this year as well. I'm not going to handicap the likelihood of success of any particular piece of legislation, but we'll keep working it.
Thank you.
My name is Marcy Muldoon, and I've followed Larry for a while now. And I heard my partner and I went to hear you at the library, and you were talking about the data centers. It's a real complex issue, weighing the needs of the constituents and the big business and the necessity for data storage. But how much of a public health issue are they?
Well, I guess it would depend on where the data centers are located. I mean, and I think the public health aspect of it comes from sometimes the noise, and then they do use quite a bit of energy. So, you know, is there sufficient energy there, or does that create any issues? The other aspect of it is they require quite a bit of water. So there may be, in terms of the water usage of cooling, so that can have an impact there as well. There are ways of having some benefits from data centers, from just the funding that they provide, and also they give off quite a bit of heat. So that can be a problem, but also if you can then tap into that heat and use that maybe as a way to, it's called waste heat, as a way to heat other parts of a city. So there's some folks in the district heating business that are quite interested to tap into data centers that are within a city and be able to use the heat from it. And it's quite a bit that they can actually use to offset. So those are some of the issues. And again, it depends on where they are. So that you've seen sometimes a push to have them a bit away from population centers, so that you don't have some of these issues. But there are some benefits if they're closer by to be able to use some of that waste heat for other purposes. So those are some of the issues.
I understand that they use so much energy, though, they can cause power outages, right? Couldn't that be a problem in the summer?
So I think we have to go into eyes wide open with data centers. Now, there's a lot of data centers that exist right now. I think the biggest issue is there's a new class of data centers that are based on things like AI, right, that use, or even things like blockchain and crypto, and that use tremendous amounts of energies. I've heard that 2 or 3 of them can often be like a state, like Indiana is the same one. So in those situations, before they would go in, this kind of thing, they would have to go to our Public Utilities Commission to make sure that there is sufficient grid capacity where they're going in. So they go through a process with the Public Utilities Commission. They go through review and certificates of needs, all these kinds of things. So there's stuff in place to try to make sure of it, but we have to go through that process. One of the other concerns is that many years ago there was put in place a tax break for data centers. And that started out in a few millions of dollars. It's now gotten up to be a pretty substantial chunk of money, like in the tens or $100 million right now that the tax break is worth. So that's one of the other things that some of my colleagues are looking at, like how much of that is really necessary, and that often goes to some very large, wealthy companies. So there's a balance. I will say, not all some parts of data centers are quite interesting in that they provide jobs and a foundation for innovation. So I think we need to be very eyes wide open about their issues, and make sure that we are not. Another aspect of data centers is when you have something that uses this much energy, if you set up your grid or that area to use it, and then that data center goes away in a couple of years, it's a big problem. And the other ratepayers then are left holding the bag. And so very often what you see with these large data centers is if you're going to do it, a commitment that you must pay for X amount of time. So those kinds of things, we need to have those kind of safeguards in place.
Really complex issue.
Yeah, it is.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Amy Rogovin. I live in St. Louis Park. I've been here about 15 years, and I'm not proud to say this is my first town hall ever. But I've been really impressed because what I see on TV is screaming and yelling and partisanship and not listening, and the opposite happened here. So what's top of mind for me right now is the waterfall effect of great change at the federal level, the drying up of money that we know maintains a standard of life and a quality of living we enjoy here in Minnesota. And without supports, other root cause issues come to the surface. My question is, what are we doing at the state level? And what can we do at the community level to maintain the quality of life we enjoy here in the park?
That is a very good question. And I know the Senate's been doing a really good job of elevating the concerns over federal funding. Like I said early on, it's 30% of our state funding. In education alone, it's 10%. We're a little luckier there, but that's about $2 billion. So to put that in perspective, we, for this budget cycle we're starting, that will fund the state for 2 years, July 1st, 2025 to 2027. Because it's the 26-27 budget starts in the middle of the year. I know it's weird. It's just how it's set up. But we only have $660 million surplus to use. So it's a real big concern about if it could blow a huge hole in our budget, especially if they include the resolution that was passed at the U.S. House about the budget resolution included a cut, like an $880 million billion cut to Medicare. And that would mean a lot of money to Minnesota. Now, and we're not even, what gives me a little hope is like we're not the biggest recipient of federal dollars. We only get about 30% back of what we pay in. So you're starting to see other states kind of catch wind of what could be happening. And even in even in Minnesota, we had a bunch of Republican legislators sign a letter to the Congress folks in Minnesota saying, please don't touch Medicare. So there is hope that people are starting to kind of wake up, but getting to that final resolution is going to be hard. And right now it's kind of like a shock and awe. Like they're just throwing so much stuff at us that we don't know what's going to happen. And I keep talking about the education realm because that's what I know the most. And we're on with the education commissioner at least twice a week talking about this because things change every other day. So they, executive order comes down saying, okay, you teach DEI, we're taking all your money away. But when they define DEI, it also includes folks with disabilities, it includes all the disaggregating of data we do to help specific students. It includes getting more teachers of color in the classroom. It's like this whole big thing. And then, they're talking about getting rid of the U.S. Department of Education, which pays for special education, Title I and IV money, which help kids that are struggling. It pays for Pell Grants. They're talking about taking away the money that we use for universal meals, SNAP. And it just is a moving target. So on February 14th, we got another letter. All the superintendents across the state got it. So it didn't just go to Minnesota Department of Education. It's like a happy Valentine's Day. We're shutting your funding off in 2 weeks. So it's this moving target. But then right on the bottom of the letter says, this doesn't hold the, how's that legal person? This doesn't carry the weight of law. And it said that right on the letter. But it's still freaked out our superintendents when they got it on the 14th. By Monday, they were closing down all the after-school activities that have to do with kids in affinity groups. They were starting to shut down classes because they just didn't know until we get direction out to them. And it's just this cascading effect. Head Start, 80% of their funding comes from the feds. When they stopped those block grants with that first EO, even though the court paused it a few days later, it took a week for them to be able to draw their money down from the federal government. So there's just a lot of confusion. But I always try to be hopeful. This year my mantra is what's in my control, what's out of my control. But what's in our control is to do what you're doing tonight and to raise your voices and find an organization or issue area you care about and start advocating there. Talk to your friends and neighbors all over the state. Like I said, we're starting to see that, oh, that's what you mean moment right now. And I'm hoping there's a lot more of those moments, and I'm hoping there's not too much damage along the way.
I'll just put some numbers on this a little bit here. Minnesota receives 709 federal awards. expected in 2025, worth $22.8 billion. And that's 36% of our state revenue that's projected for 2025. So that gives you an idea of how substantial this is. I don't have dollar amounts for the areas of my budget focus, but Public Safety Department receives 73 federal awards, and the Department of Corrections receives 23 federal awards. The Supreme Court and district courts together get 13. Veterans Affairs Department gets 6. So there's an awful lot of funding that comes through from the federal government. So I have no problem with reviewing. In fact, I would encourage the review of programs and spending decisions at the state level and at the federal level to make sure that the taxpayer dollars are being spent wisely. But a chaotic slash and burn process is not the right way to do it. I'm afraid that's what we're dealing with right now. And I don't expect it to get any better in the short term. So speaking out like this is a great way to work on it. So thanks for being here, Amy.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, at the state level, we will do what we can, but with the kind of numbers that Senator Latz talked about, there's a limited amount of what we can do. But many of the things happening, the executive orders and stuff, are not legal, right? The executive branch does not make laws. They're supposed to implement the laws. And so we are fighting back on things that are not legal. And we even had, as Rep. Youakim mentioned, 14 Republican colleagues of ours put a note out saying, hey, keep your hand, watch out with what you're doing on Medicaid. So the Attorney General is very important in this. And, so if you see things, he's doing a lot. We're in regular communication with him. We have a group we call the Lawyer Caucus in the House. I imagine folks in the Senate that are meeting with agencies regularly and figuring out, okay, what's going on. It's going to be really easy in this situation to get demoralized. And what I would encourage us all to do in this, and is not to, right? There's a flurry of things happening, and if you disagree with it, speak up, be in community with each other, build momentum, talk about it, post about it on social media, come to us, come to your federal representatives, call them. We need to build. Now, exactly where this is going, I think, is not clear. And hopefully we can come to some accommodations with what's happening at the federal level. But I think the thing we need to do is keep talking and pushing back and speaking up and be together and tell us. And we will do what we can. But we're going to have some fighting to do to preserve some of the things that we care about.
Would it be all right if I spoke to the municipal level that she brought up real quick?
Yes, please. And this is, and we should recognize here, this is Councilmember Paul Beaudoin.
Paul Beaudoin, I'm on the St. Louis Park City Council. It's weird to be on this side. On the local level that you brought up, I just want you to know what we're doing as a city. Our city manager, Kim Keller, has organized a group of savvy people on our city staff that are watching all of these executive orders and such and trying to figure out, might that impact something happening here in St. Louis Park? So they have a very watchful eye on everything that's coming down. That's a lot of the work that they're doing right now, which is unfortunate because it pulls them off of other work they could be doing, but it's necessary. We have a very good relationship with these fine folk over here. So when we get questions about something, we can get in communication with them really quickly, like, hey, is this going to impact this road project or this fire truck or whatever it might be? And quite honestly, those are the kinds of things that are in jeopardy. So yeah, I just wanted to let you all know that the city is really on this. We have an incredibly savvy staff. I've been so impressed. And they're on top of it and watching it. And they'll get on them, and then they'll get on Keith, and then they'll get on it, and we'll keep a watchful eye on it to make sure things are still clicking in St. Louis Park. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
And I think maybe we probably have one more question here, a little. two more. Okay. Why don't we just, if we can be quick? Yeah.
Hi, I'm Rosalind. I live here in St. Louis Park. This is a question probably Representative Kraft you could answer best, but I'm happy to hear from any of you. So, as you may be aware, U.S. Representative Pete Stauber, sponsored a bill to reverse a 20-year mining ban up in the Boundary Waters. That is our greatest resource here in Minnesota, is our water. And so obviously there's a lot of federal land, but I'm wondering, and we have treaties, of course, with our lovely neighbors to the north, but I'm wondering at the state level if there are proposals to maybe kind of slow some of that down, or what at the state we can do. And I will slink back to my seat while you answer. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. So there is a lot we can do. One of my new colleagues actually has worked for Save the Boundary Waters. There's a bill that bans this kind of mining in the boundary waters and the watershed. That's the simple thing we can do that I've signed on the past couple of years. And there may be other things we can do. The DNR can do things. So what I would encourage you outside of that bill is to, and following that, tracking that, I'm sure it'll get a hearing once we're back to 50/50 in the Environment Committee, is sign up for updates at the Environment Committee and on that bill. So that's the most direct one.
I will try to make this quick. I'm Dee Marcus. I live in St. Louis Park. Been here for 7 years, I think now. My question is, I know that there's a lot of disinformation, misinformation out there. We see it in the media. Like there was biased covering about what happened with the House, in the beginning of the session and everything. What can we do to help combat that? Is there like any law we can draft up, or a bill we can draft up that really combats just the unethical journalism that's going on? Because if people don't have access to accurate information, like facts, not opinions, not what wealthy owners of media orgs want you to know, like how are we supposed to make informed choices? And maybe part of that is teaching kids media literacy. Like, I don't know if we could do a bill for media literacy classes, start them young so that they can recognize, what isn't true and what is, like who's trying to sell you propaganda, because as we progress on, if nobody knows what's true, it makes it very hard to come and work together, because your whole basis of the information you're working on is faulty. And so if your data is faulty, your results are going to be faulty. And I don't want to see Minnesota slide into any worse than it already has, into this massive division that is purposely being perpetrated on our country.
So a lot of our grad standards in social studies and English have benchmarks around media literacy, of course, age appropriate as you go on, and then our librarians do a great job at it. And education in itself tries to teach kids and lifelong learners how to discern between what you're consuming as a person on media. A lot of it is trying to support our local media that has been kind of boxed out. But I'm also a little biased. I was a journalism major, and I really do believe in the First Estate. And so, you have that balance, right? But the best thing you can do, and I just hoard information because I like to see it from all the angles, and is to just be a good consumer too. Like, don't just watch one station, check the other one out, see what other people are saying, have that discourse, polite discourse online, and talk to your neighbors and your friends, and just, dig that truth out for yourself too. But I think I always feel like the next generation is going to save us, right? And our next generation is becoming pretty savvy, which is really good. But yeah, it is frustrating because our media market is shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. And then you have at the national level, they just put out an order today that they're getting to pick and choose who's in the press room. So that frightens me. Yeah. That frightens me because first they do come for the folks that are the truth tellers, and then they come after the lawyers, and then they just start picking people off. And we can't let that happen. Yeah. And it's up to us too to just make sure that we are good consumers. And I stay on all the social media things because I don't want to isolate myself, but it is hard sometimes to see some stuff that's not true.
Okay. And if I wanted to request your presence on a different social media platform that none of you are on, who would I contact to try to get accounts set up?
Yeah, just email our emails. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
I'll just add one comment. It's a great question. It's a tough question, and one of the things that I've also realized is that there are folks that have different views that would say the same thing about the media that you are listening to, that I'm, and it's tough when you have that kind of passion on both sides and differences in facts. And I don't know the answer. The only other than I think we have to try to talk, right? To find ways of connecting with folks and planting seeds that can grow us together over time. But it's really tough situation. So.
Yeah, and I would also add again too is I think we've lost the fine art of seeing the humanity in each other. So watch the news, get on social media, see all that, but don't forget to talk to your neighbor.
So maybe we'll each take a couple of minutes just for some closing thoughts, and then we'll wrap up. First of all, thank you again for coming. I brought some of my 2024 session reports, put them out on the table there, so if you arrived before I got here, you might not have seen them. You're welcome to take one as you leave. I just wanted to highlight real quickly a couple of pieces I'm working on legislatively this session. One is I've got a housing package that's intended to expand the availability of affordable housing for people who will be using housing vouchers. I've brought together the Multi-Housing Association along with some other affordable housing advocates to try to create some incentives, to reduce some of the regulatory barriers, to create some regional centers that can connect landlords and potential tenants so you can match up availability, to reduce some of the carrying costs of empty space while inspections and other hurdles are being met, to try to expand the availability of affordable housing in Minnesota. I've got a bill to add a civil commitment coordinator position into the Attorney General's office to take a big picture view and gather data on the effectiveness of our civil commitment system in Minnesota. So many of our people with mental health issues end up in the criminal justice system, get housed in jails, which are not intended for that purpose and really are bad for people with mental illness as well. So I'm hoping that we can make some progress there as well. And then the last thing I'll say, in defense of lawyers, for those of you, you know the Shakespeare line that says, "First, let's kill all the lawyers." It gets taken out of context all the time. It really was, those lines were spoken by the leader of Cade's revolution, who were attempting to overthrow the constitutional government. And they said, in order to be able to overthrow the constitutional government, first we have to get rid of the lawyers who are the protectors of liberty and constitutional protections. So put it in context, we're not all bad. So thank you for being here tonight.
I would echo that. I was actually seriously worried that they're going after the lawyers and the journalists. I just want to say I brought some copies of the state constitution back there and a little booklet for the middle school, high school on a bill that how a bill becomes a law. I'd encourage you to sign up for any of our weekly updates. Just go to either house.mn.gov or senate.mn.gov and look on the member page. And also check out our websites. It is, they're not the prettiest, but they've gotten national awards for the amount of data we have on there. All of our committees are now live streamed and archived. You can curate your own bill list that you want to follow, and they'll email you when it moves from committee to committee. It's a really great source of information. And I just wrapped up, I usually do 6 community conversations in January and February in the libraries. I just wrapped that up. And just right now, it's hard to break through the noise, right? There's a lot of noise on social media and out on mainstream media, and a lot of noise, frankly, coming from the Capitol. And I always say this, think about how words matter, and think that good public policy and things that help people don't usually fit on bumper stickers. So if somebody's talking to you like they're just stringing together bumper stickers, stop and think and actually look at the bill and try to figure out what's going on. A lot of what's hitting the House floor right now is never going to become law. I feel like we're wasting all this time going through this circus. And we have a bill up on Monday that actually is going to really hurt kids. So thank you for being here. Thank you for paying attention. And if you ever have any questions, please don't hesitate to call any of us.
Yes. Can I say a little bit? Very quickly, thank you for coming. It is an intense time right now. I think we all occasionally get depressed about some things that are happening. That's okay, but still find joy, stay connected. If you have issues, don't hesitate to reach out. And come visit me at the Capitol. I make ice cream on Sunday nights, and then bring it in. All right. Thank you all.